Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Policy Subcommittee of the School Committee. This is an extra meeting in the sense that normally we would meet one time a month, but because we were not able to have full copies of the warrant articles in their entirety in time for our monthly subcommittee meeting, we are going to be reviewing warrant articles at this meeting. We also had a couple of other substantive items on the agenda that we will also be dealing with today due to running out of time at the last meeting, as well as to the sense of urgency that I sensed regarding the restraint policy in particular. So we will also be reviewing that. But to begin, our first agenda item is approval of the minutes from the last two meetings. If we can have a pair of separate votes for that. Would someone like to move the February 14th minutes?
Move that.
Second.
Thank you. Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Would someone like to move the minutes from March 14th?
So David, there might be a problem here because I wasn't there and would have to abstain. So we might not have.
You can still vote if you'd like to. You don't.
Oh, I can? Okay. I've reviewed them. So, okay.
I'll move them anyway.
Okay, I'll second them so Valerie can feel comfortable. Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So that gets us to our first substantive item on the agenda, which is a review of the school committee statement in response to recent racist and anti-Semitic incidents. Before we go to that, I've promised Arthur Conquest an opportunity to address us. He had participated in public comments at our special school committee meeting on Sunday, and he was kind enough to adhere to the 2-minute requirements that we did not end up observing, just because I felt that on a day that was so important to so many people and to so many of us, that we shouldn't cut anyone off. But Arthur's remarks were initially intended to be a bit longer. So I'd like to afford him that opportunity now because I think it will also help inform us in our discussion around our statement. So Robin, if you could promote Arthur to panelist. Good evening, Arthur. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
I'm right here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Arthur Conquest. Thank you for extending me this opportunity. Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. I have two things I want to address. First, during public comment at the school committee meeting, if the time limit for individual presentations is set for 2 minutes, as it was Sunday past, then we should hold speakers to that time. To do so otherwise is disrespectful towards other individuals who have signed up to speak and are waiting in line. There were 26 speakers Sunday afternoon. Multiply their 2 minutes, and that's 1 hour for starters. But how many of the speakers extended their presentation to 5 minutes? How many for 4 and 3 minutes? Zoom meetings have to be tighter controlled. I just appreciate if the school committee respected my time. Tell me I'm the 23rd person on the list if the meetings were live, and I could maybe see who was ahead of me, given that I signed up at 1:00 p.m. because of a mix-up. I hope I'm making sense. Second, I briefly want to add 30 seconds to the 2 minutes and 10-second presentation I made to you Sunday afternoon past. Say 6 months ago, Brookline squandered $11 million on the Gerald Alston case, Massachusetts judicial case settlement. What could the Brookline Public School Committee and the Brookline Public Schools do right now with that $11 million? And if not all of it right now, then spread it out over the next year. Keep following the racist ideology that is baked into the soul of this community. Out of respect of your time, I intend to write the school committee or you guys an email at 1 o'clock this morning, which is when I do my best communications, with a request I'd like to set before you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. All right, so have all of you received the most updated draft of the proposed school committee statement? I sent it only a couple minutes before we started the meeting. There was another copy that is substantially similar that went out yesterday, but the most recent one was sent at 4:58, which included a couple of edits.
Can we maybe just point out the edits when it's up, if they're minor?
Sure. So one of them, just try to find this here.
I had a couple comments on the earlier version, so I don't know if they were corrected or not.
Okay. Trying to open it, have a lot of files open, my apologies. All right, so one of the changes was if you look down at bullet number 5, instead of beginning with "we will explore ways to empower traditionally marginalized communities with opportunities for direct participation in school committee affairs," there's a sentence prior to that now, which reads, "We recognize the importance of having a school committee, an administration, and a teaching staff that are more representative of the families that we serve." That's one addition. The second addition, after the 6th bullet point, the first sentence of the paragraph, "These actions," now emphasize that this will be a district-wide initiative across all grade bands. So it now reads, "These actions are important to district-wide pre-K through grade 12 and are aligned with the committee's legal powers and duties," and the rest of it is the same. So those are the two changes from the draft that went out yesterday.
Thank you. The pre-K to 12 covers one of my points, or one of my.
Does anyone else have a comment regarding this draft?
I have a couple. Do you want me to continue?
Sure.
In the first sentence, "remind us," just feels sort of weak to me. I would suggest either "are the most recent examples" or something similar. And then we talk about homophobia and transphobia later, but we don't raise it up at the top. And I would encourage us to put it in the first paragraph and not just at the end. Although I would recommend something more along the lines of anti-LGBTQ discrimination, just to make sure that we cover everyone who identifies under the umbrella.
So I'll add homophobia, transphobia.
No, I would take out homophobia, transphobia, and just have anti-LGBTQ discrimination, just because some non-binary students don't identify under the trans umbrella and so forth and so on.
It's all inclusive.
Yes, exactly. And
Okay, and then make the language toward the end similar. So anti-LGBTQ discrimination.
yes.
Okay.
On that point, Val, I'm sorry, I'm not a member of the committee, so just real quick, I had the opposite reaction. I was wondering if the first sentence shouldn't be general instead. Should just say the recent incidents at Brookline High School are whatever verb, that discrimination in all its forms must be combated with urgency and vigor. So as not to have people distracted by who is or is not well represented by the specific form of discrimination in that first sentence. Just bam, discrimination. We are fighting at it. This is a statement on its behalf.
It could be made into 2 sentences following on what you're saying. Take that second clause, put it up with the recent incidents at Brookline High School, remind us that harassment, discrimination across all of our schools must be combated, period. And then the scourges of racism, anti-ableism, harassment, and whatever are not tolerated in the school system.
Okay.
Something,
others agree?
it's not good language, but something to that effect.
Andy?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, I don't want to take the discussion away if people still wanted to be talking about that particular wording. I had a couple of other places where I wonder about the wording. So in the last bullet point where it says we will work with our district partners, what's meant by our district partners? Are we talking about staff?
Yes, that's what I meant by that, but we could just spell that out and be direct.
Yeah, but with PSB staff or whoever or whatever is the broadest category we mean there.
Okay.
And then the third bullet point, we will establish a subcommittee. And then the purpose that's then given sounds to me more like what a task force does rather than what a subcommittee does, because it's sort of one-time thing to establish a strategic plan. And I know that we'll be discussing the possible establishment of a subcommittee on Thursday. I'm wondering whether, it may be moved if we do end up establishing a subcommittee, but at any rate, the wording here is a bit confusing because if there is going to be a subcommittee, it'll be doing more than this. And if it's just doing this, then it won't be a subcommittee, it'll be a task force. So.
All right, since it appears very likely that Valerie and Stephen would be on this subcommittee, if we end up voting it on Thursday, do the two of you have some suggested wording for the charge of this subcommittee that can be added into this section here?
Yeah,
Well, I would, I guess, establish, right, a subcommittee on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And then the subcommittee shall be charged with, and then sort of proceed with the rest, including but not limited to. Does that make sense, David, to you?
I again was thinking of something broader, something like we will establish a subcommittee named TBD, because I think there's some discussion to be had around that, for the purpose of setting targets for the district around educational equity / DEI and J, and holding the district accountable for progress towards those goals, period. And then that committee will also be tasked with liaising with the Office of Educational Equity. I think keeping it broad, like.
Well, I actually think you just limited it, Stephen, by saying, that it's only with Janae, right? Like this may be with Casey, it may be with lots of other folks as well.
Okay, that's a separate issue, and you may be right on that.
Right, like it may be with curriculum, so it may be sometimes with Leslie. So
all right, before I formulate
can I ask a question, a clarification question?
Yes.
What is the sentence? What is the issue? Is the issue that green on my screen, the new text is too limiting, or that the original text is too limiting?
Well, my original comment was not about anything being too limiting. It was simply that it said that we were going to establish a subcommittee to do X, where doing X is actually the job of a task force, right? So
Why is that the
is
job of a task force?
Because it's a one-time thing to set up a
Why is it
strategic
a
plan.
one-time thing? Why is an action plan a one-time thing?
To develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion action plan. So to develop an action plan is a one-time thing. Now, this can be one of the things that the subcommittee does. All I'm saying is that, you know, I like Val's form of words, which is that we're going to set up a subcommittee, and this subcommittee will develop an action plan, you know, and it will also do some other things, which we don't all have to spell out. Yeah. Or if in fact all we want to do is set up a group that develops an action plan, then that's not a subcommittee, that's a task force.
See, I was thinking about it originally as an action plan, which is, for example, revised annually and checked for accountability and has a whole bunch of different tasks that come out from it. So to me, that was the idea of an action plan is not a one-time thing. The problem is too much of our work has been thought of as a one-time thing, but that this had constant sort of refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thinking, and it's not clear in the language, basically, based
Yeah, I
on
guess
your
not,
reaction.
yeah.
It wasn't clear.
Right.
But that was what I was thinking, was it was a living, evolving plan, at minimum renewed annually.
Ellen?
So it seems to me this particular bullet is putting somewhat the cart before the horse. It seems to me we are going in, I know we are going in to be doing a strategic plan. All of these issues should be part of the strategic plan, which we hold the superintendent and the staff accountable to. And I mean, I can see doing a task force to sort of work on the issues that we would want to address then in the strategic plan, but this should be part of the strategic plan. And I'm not sure having another subcommittee do the work that the strategic plan should be doing, which should have metrics, should have goals, metrics, and mission, vision, whatever, to help guide us on all of these issues. And this, you know, should be part of that. I'm not clear. I worry that we're trying to do things from too many angles and then nothing will happen. So.
But Helen, not everything in the action plan, there's a whole bunch of stuff within the school committee scope, which is not part of the superintendent's responsibility. It's our responsibility.
What's that?
Policy, for example. If we're going to do the policy review, that is within our responsibility.
Okay, I didn't talk about that one. I'm talking about the subcommittee, Mariah.
No, I understand, but well, the policy one has been added since originally it was written, but the idea would be that all of these, like the action plan would articulate specific things, not within the superintendent's scope, but within the scope of the school committee, which, and again, it would be aligned with the strategic plan, but it would be our own responsibilities.
What? I mean, Mariah, what? I'm not clear. I guess I don't understand. I understand the policy handbook. I certainly understand our anti-discrimination, anti-racist leadership. I agree with that. You know, empowering the superintendent to do the things that he needs to do, that we expect him to do. But I'm not clear about this subcommittee. And
I guess, Helen, I would ask you how you view our role of having a curriculum subcommittee.
So, yeah, no, that's a good question. We determined the budget for the curriculum subcommittee. I mean, we determined the budget for the schools. You know, part of the schools is the curriculum, which costs certain amounts of money. They use us as a sounding board for the community, you know, in terms of some of the things they're bringing forward, some of the ideas that they bring forward. But our role has to do with more, so we approve classes at the high school because there's a budgetary implication, those sorts of things. That's how I see it. You know, there are committees that have, school committees that have one subcommittee or two subcommittees. You know, I mean, it's, you know, it's sort of the way you want to do the work. But I worry that we're sort of going out ahead of the strategic plan. This will certainly be part of it. I have no doubt. It was in the past, actually. gonna look up some of the last strategic plan where we had a lot of these issues and look at it. I think where our job is to make sure that the strategic plan is being held to, that where the metrics are being met. That's definitely our responsibility. The superintendent's and then ours to evaluate him on that. So that's my 2 cents. But I'm not on the committee, on this committee.
Andy?
Yeah, so I mean, for some of our other subcommittees, such as curriculum and finance, right, that part of the purpose of the subcommittee is to provide support for and a sounding board for the senior staff who are sort of directly responsible for that area. So in this case, that would mean Janae, who currently runs an office consisting entirely of herself, and to some extent, perhaps Linus. So have they weighed in on this? That they'd be kind of answering to this subcommittee, right?
I think Stephen has an answer to that specific question. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, I can't speak for them. I could say that I've talked with them individually on the topic, and they seem to me to be expressing support. I think also Dr. Guillory wants to make sure that if such an office is established, it's established on a timeline that makes sense in relation to both his strategic plan and with the office's capacity to execute that plan, so that he doesn't want a subcommittee demanding accountability before they have the capacity to deliver. That said, just 2 quick comments. One, Helen, I think that was actually, I think I agree with you on your point that it may not make sense for a subcommittee to do goal setting. Perhaps that is the work of the strategic plan. But I do think it makes sense to have a mechanism that provides transparency into progress and provides cooperation and thought leadership for the determination of strategies to execute that plan, much in the same way that we do on curriculum and policy and finance and et cetera, especially since this is an issue that I think it's fair to say the district has struggled to make progress on for quite some time. I think the addition, I hear you that additional work is no one's goal. But I think an additional mechanism for thought leadership and accountability and transparency is very desirable. What I am hung up on now is, Val, as your comment, and I had talked with a few members of the community about this, is really the breadth of this subcommittee, to what extent it should be a liaison with the Office of Educational Equity and to what extent OSS may or may not be included. I thought Faith's comments in the Sunday meeting were very compelling around the importance of not making sure that we don't leave out people with disabilities. And I don't have an answer on that. I'm just hypothetical to share where I was at.
I mean, I'll share with you where I'm at. It's not just, I mentioned OSS as one for ableism, but there's the Brookline Commission on Women. There are EL. I mean, there are lots and lots of groups that may want to come speak and be, and we may want to consult on this subcommittee. So I don't think that there's a dearth of community groups that are interested in the work.
But my concern is really traction. So it seemed to me that the way that subcommittees have created change has been when they are strongly linked with and partnered with an entity within the central administration, so that there's equal parts strategic and implementation capacity. And if there isn't a really clear and direct link to implementation capacity, we run the risk of losing traction, which to me would be a very bad case outcome here, which is why I had been thinking of a more tight liaison with the Office of Educational Equity. But sorry, I'll stop there.
I mean, I just think there are just going to be times when you need Linus and when you need Casey and when you need others, right? Like there's a intersectional issue related to sexism, homophobia, and some other harassment. You may need a couple of people. If there's an ableism and a racism, you may need a couple of people. So, there are, I think, are just instances where there's going to be cross-pollination.
I agree with Valerie that I think we want to construe the charge of this subcommittee broadly, because it encompasses potentially a lot of different areas beyond the Office of Equity in and of itself. While I think that would probably be the main liaison, it would not be the only one. Mariah? See you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I had specific comments on the draft, but I don't want to cut off the conversation now, unless you're ready for me to change subjects a little bit.
I would actually love to hear, Mariah, your thoughts on this discussion, because I know you were advancing a slightly different mechanism in Sunday's meeting. Where are you in what mechanism would be the most effective, both in terms of addressing the problem and gaining real traction?
What do you mean about in terms of a different mechanism?
Well, so you were talking more about an action plan, and I had leaned more towards a subcommittee because I was afraid an action plan wouldn't have sufficient traction. It wouldn't have an implementation partner. Are you swayed by this discussion? Do you think that we should consider an action plan instead of a subcommittee? I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts.
I think that we need a subcommittee, and I'm not sure why an action plan wouldn't come from a subcommittee.
Oh, I'm in.
Okay.
Okay.
I agree with Mariah. I don't see why an action plan can't be the beginning work for a subcommittee, and then it's regularly reviewed and monitored, and we look at the metrics and whether milestones are being met, which is what we do in multiple other committees, like curriculum, for instance, in particular. So I've tried this again in terms of formulating some new language for this paragraph we've been discussing. We will explore establishing a subcommittee on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice that will include in its charge an action plan for the school committee aligned with the district strategic plan. As a part of this plan, the subcommittee will explore ways to address not only overt forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and harassment, but also microaggressions and implicit bias. The subcommittee will review with PSB staff on a continuing basis whether metrics are being met in these areas.
Can I make
Stephen?
one oh,
All right.
sorry. I also had
Um,
other comments to make when you do call on me, just by the way.
All right, that's fine. It's just, well,
Okay.
since we're mostly focused on this paragraph, let's continue on this and then we'll
Yeah.
move on.
I still have
Other
other comments on this paragraph too after Stephen.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
I would just strike the last sentence. I think any specific actions will be included within the strategic plan. I think to try to articulate them now is premature.
By the last sentence, do you mean about on a continuing basis?
No, I mean the one that said including microaggressions and so on. Just to articulate the parameters of what that strategic plan might encompass. I would hate for that to limit us.
I think that's just talking about the committee, but I may be misreading.
And it says as a part of this plan, so it's not saying it's exclusive to that. I added that language in actually because I received input from a couple members who really wanted an explicit
Then I
mention
retract.
of microaggression and implicit bias.
David, can you pull it up on the screen? Because I'm not a very good
Sure.
verbal absorber of what is happening.
Can I ask a question? I have two questions. One, if that's okay. David,
Yes, go ahead.
if this committee is success, what will success look like for this committee?
Does everyone see the draft on the screen?
Yep.
Okay.
So we're talking, just to be clear, we're talking about the third bullet, right? The exact wording in the third bullet.
That is correct.
Okay. Why did we write explore establishing?
Helen's point that we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit, just from a technical perspective. We can't be saying that we are establishing before we've actually established it, and that's going to require a vote. I anticipate that we will have the votes to establish it, but depending on the exact voting order and whether the discussion at full school committee leads to a different conclusion or outcome, I don't think we should have in our statement a commitment that we might not be able to actually keep.
So, but if both are voted on Thursday, will it then go to past tense? Or I guess I'm just
I'm also like, well, if we can't say that we'll pursue training if we haven't already done it. Like, I guess I'm confused by any sort of statements affirming anything if we can't affirm anything until we've already done it. Like, that doesn't.
Is this docketed for after or before the vote on establishing a subcommittee? Because if we do the subcommittee vote first, then we can turn this into we have established.
Right.
True. Let me try to find that. Either way, we can always move around the items on that docket. So I'll take out explore. We will establish and we'll see what happens.
Nobody answered my question.
Sorry, go ahead again, Helen.
I have an answer to it, Helen. I just didn't. Anyway.
Could you repeat your question, Helen?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Oh, what does success look like? I think you were saying.
Yeah, what does success look like for this subcommittee?
Go ahead, Mariah. You wanted to answer.
Well, I have some of my own thoughts on it, which is I would like to see a committee that is really bringing an active lens and promoting issues of anti-racism and diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. I would like to be able to point to specific measures where we see change. I would like the committee itself to perhaps, look at its composition and see how itself is becoming more inclusive and welcome for broader membership, among other ideas. So those are some of the things I'd like to see. I'd like to see a committee that actually has training in anti-racist and anti-discrimination is written there.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about the whole thing. I'm talking about just the subcommittee.
But if the subcommittee gets some of those things to happen, to me, that is a successful outcome.
Yeah, can I pile on to that, Helen?
Yeah.
I totally hear your question. To me, it's does the subcommittee contribute ideas, approaches, actions, methodologies, etc., that assists the central administration in operationalizing its core ideas on DEI and J, for instance, or it provides additional transparency and communication to the broader public around the activities in these areas. To me, those are more core to what a subcommittee's mission around here would be. And those things I think are proxies for change, but those are, I think of those as the outputs of the subcommittee rather than the outcomes. Does that strike you as reasonable?
I think, I don't know. It's, I guess.
I think the earlier comparison.
It's not that it's not reasonable. It's just that I'm not sure that, I'm not sure how this happened. I mean, I think about our role as the governance board, and making sure that the people who are working are doing this work, and some of it does happen through subcommittee, but isn't this a piece of the whole committee? I don't know. I'm having difficulty with it. And my second question was to ask Linus, who is on this, what his thoughts are, what he's seen in other communities and what he might think of having another subcommittee.
Dr. Guillory, go ahead.
And I'm putting him on the spot here right now. But is he there?
I know he was having some connection issues. I can try to text him and let him know.
Okay, great. Okay. So let's move on.
Mariah?
Sorry, are you calling me for general comments now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Let me look at it. Sorry to just. So my one comment on what I can see on the screen right now is I appreciate, I'm looking at the bullet number 5 that starts with we recognize, but that buries the action there. And I would like to flip the order around about putting the direct participation sentence first and saying we're exploring ways to do this because we recognize. Do you see what I mean? Because that first sentence is not an action, that's a justification for the action. So.
All right, I'm fine with that. And I believe that the person who suggested this language also was okay with either order.
Okay.
So I was the person who suggested that that language, to probably not surprising. But having read the order though, David, that you put it in, I kind of like it that way. But before I saw both versions, I was agnostic, but I actually prefer what you had, just because I think
It's just not an action though.
But I get it, but I think our action makes sense in that context. Like this is the what we really want is to have across the board, you know, a school committee and administration and a teaching staff that are more representative. The one thing we can change immediately is to some extent our own composition, right? So we're going to do that. So to me, the lead is not the immediate action, which is, you know, important, but not as big a deal as sort of, you know, having an administration and a teaching staff that are more representative.
Then can we frame it as because we recognize or in the beginning of the second sentence, because of this, we will explore, just to contextualize that a little bit. Yeah, like over there, because of this. Yeah, something like that. And then
Accordingly or something.
yeah, something like that, just to tie it together. Then the other comment I had is, why did in the next full paragraph, why did the power and duty of selecting and terminating the superintendent get removed, given that it's our legal power and duty?
Because even though, well, we have many powers and duties actually that extend beyond these three that we're not enumerating. So the concern was that highlighting that as one of them might look like we are holding a cudgel over the superintendent and the district if all of our initiatives are not completed within the time frame that we would like to see, and it sounded a little threatening.
What are the other? It's the actual words from the legislation. What are the other things that we have a legal power and duty to do that aren't in the legislation?
So one example is, and I've never seen this come up, but we can actually impose certain textbooks by a supermajority vote if 6 of the 9 of us insisted on a class having certain textbooks. There's actually quite a litany of other random powers that we have.
Well, I will say though that I think, can you scroll up a little bit?
Sure.
That it is important though to talk about the evaluation, and we talk about it in the second bullet. If you don't want to use the word select and terminate, that's fine, but a superintendent evaluation is part of this. So even if you don't want to use terminate and evaluate or terminate and select, which is the official legislative language, evaluate to me.
Well, how about maybe, all right. All right, what do others think? Do you want that language back in?
I agree that select and terminate is a bit of a cudgel. I actually, independently of Mariah, wanted to suggest evaluate the superintendent. We could also say oversee, as we do for the budget. I don't think that's a distortion, right?
Yes, I think that's, we also actually oversee deputy superintendents, because while the superintendent proposes who we're going to hire, we actually affirmatively vote on those hires for deputy superintendents.
Do we evaluate them? Or he does, doesn't he? Right. I would prefer to just leave it as evaluate the superintendent, but.
I think that's fine. I would be happy with that too.
Can we combine this? I'm sorry, are we looking? Oh, I see. To me, this needs to be combined with that earlier bullet, so that it's not divorced from empower. So, because I think what we need to commit to is empowering, resourcing, and holding accountable the superintendent for these issues. And because to hold accountable without doing the rest is to set up for failure.
But we did already say that we're providing the resources.
I think it's most powerful to put the 3 together, because that's the statement saying how we're going to change our relationship to central administration, to our superintendent. And we're going to do it by making sure this policy empowers, resources, and holds accountable. It's a statement of our relationship. I guess what I'm really saying is it's most impactful to pack it all together.
What do others think? To me, it's already in that sentence, but I don't know how others feel.
I prefer it as it is now.
I do as well, although I'm hoping we can take out celebration in that second bullet. Every time I hear celebration of diversity, this may be just me, but I hear like flowery words about not necessarily doing much. That may be my own bias on that.
I think that a lot of what I've heard about is we talk a lot about tolerance, and tolerance is a real low bar.
Absolutely.
And so what is the word which is the opposite of tolerance, which is, you know, the joy, the happiness of diversity. This, and that's where the word of celebration is, right? It's not just tolerance, but it's something better than tolerance. Beyond that, I leave it to you, but just I do not like, I personally do not like the word tolerance because it really sets a low bar of what we expect to achieve.
I was just going to suggest embed diversity and a commitment to, or
respect for
embed a
diversity.
commitment to diversity and inclusion.
Or a respect for diversity, inclusion, or
Right, 'cause-
something like that.
Okay.
Respect also is one of those words that
Respect feels like
it feels like tolerance to me. Exactly.
But that's our actual goal. So
Right,
It's not my
because
actual goal, but okay.
it's the district's actual goal.
It's not my actual goal though.
It was other people
look,
before you.
that's my point of the district's goal might be that now, but is that where we want to go?
Well, I think the strategic plan will help us to know where we want to go.
I think Val's solution works. Let's just not qualify it. We want to have diversity as a central unifying component.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, any other?
Those were my, I think you mind just scrolling to the end of the document? I think those were my only comments, but I just want to, and then just Val's questions about wording, where the wording goes, and is it supposed to be twice on the last paragraph is fine too. And again, I have a question about the word of respect in the last paragraph, but.
Where are you, Mariah?
Where it says a safe school environment that respects the identity and individuality of every student. Respect to me is only a hair above tolerance, but.
So what will be another suggestion for that language?
I don't know, Val doesn't like celebration or celebrates, and I get why, but I also have a sort of, I want to aspire to a higher bar.
Firm.
Sorry, say what?
Is affirm any better than respect?
How about embraces?
Is that okay with you, Val? Embraces?
Embraces is good with me, good for me.
Okay.
I'm noticing though, I think that I don't think we included, and maybe this goes to Stephen's initial point up in the first paragraph. I don't know that we included sexism. Whatever we're doing, I think we should just make it consistent. Whatever order, if you want to do it alphabetically, I don't know, but.
Yes, all right, so how should we handle this order? I was thinking initially alphabetically, but if we're referring to the most recent incidents, those specifically were racist and anti-Semitic. So I worry about burying those two, even though.
I think racism up front is appropriate. I guess I was just saying to be consistent in the order in the first and last paragraph.
Sorry, David, I just want to note that the word recent repeats twice in the first sentence. If you wanted to say something like, the recent incidents at Brookline High School show that the scourges.
Or the latest examples, could just be the latest examples.
Okay.
Mariah, I'm still thinking about how best to link the two sentences in that fifth bullet point. What about keeping the order, but instead of accordingly, you could say as a first step, just to make it clear that like this is like a relatively small first step, part of a much bigger picture.
Okay.
All right, we're looking at the fifth bullet point again.
Yeah, I was just suggesting that instead of accordingly, what if we say as a first step?
All right. Any other comments? Ellen?
I guess I am going to be in the minority here on this one, but I'm concerned about the slippery, go back to number 5, the bullet point, I think it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The slippery slope of appointing a METCO liaison to the school committee. There'll be other groups that want to be appointed too. We have liaisons to all these groups from the school committee. We already attend their meetings and report back to the full committee. And certainly if any of these groups want to come and talk to the full committee, we certainly invite them at any point. I worry about what unintended consequences will be from appointing just one group as a liaison.
So from my perspective, Helen, for METCO, I guess I would point to the fact that they're not ever eligible to run for Brookline School Committee because they're registered to vote elsewhere. So for me, it feels different than other folks and other groups in town.
I agree with Val. There are only 2 constituencies of families that are not necessarily residents of Brookline. So METCO, certainly they're not residents, and then also our materials fee students.
Well, and also, but our families from other countries, they can't vote.
That's true.
I mean, if we start to think about this, it can balloon. I don't know.
On the other hand, when you say that, I think, wow, maybe they should have a liaison too. And I'm not sure that's a problem.
Well, they do. We do. We have a liaison to the English learners parent.
But they don't have a liaison to us.
I think for the purposes of this policy statement, we're trying to remedy a problem that we perceive to be urgent. And that is the problem of racial equity. The problem spirals out in many different directions, and we're trying to be inclusive about how to define this problem. But I don't have an issue with singling out METCO parents as by including their voice, we're helping remedy a specific problem. I hear you again, Helen, that there is inconsistency here, but I support that inconsistency because I think we've reasonably defined a problem to address.
Okay.
Also, Helen, it's saying we will explore ways to empower. It's not insisting on a particular precise method. That is still to be determined.
I mean, the needs of students whose families are unregistered voters didn't prompt a walkout 5 years ago as well. I mean, it doesn't seem, unless there's an argument that there's an equally urgent buried problem, it seems quite right to me to make this, to propose this remedy, essentially.
Right, but Stephen, I also think it's important that we not make the assumption, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but some could look at our attributing everything to Metco for the walkout of our students of color. There are obviously a lot of students of color who do live in Brookline, and not all students of color think exactly alike. So while having Metco participation, I agree with you, is very important, I'm not sure that we could rely on that exclusively as the voice
Sure.
of.
Of course. I mean, if you wanted to expand the sentence to say, like, we recognize that the Metco student population is only a portion of our students of color, but towards the overall objective of increasing representation of families of color, we propose also something like this. I totally agree with you, David.
Why don't you, could you just say, rather than METCO, say appointment of liaisons? Liaisons.
I mean, to me,
From
like
these
Metco,
communities.
It's like a historic desegregation program. Like there's no better, there's hardly any other comparable initiative in America that's like representative of this value, right? I mean, I hear you, Mariah.
I'm just saying that we can, like, poor Helen brought up a point that I agree with, and so I would push it further. Like, well, it might not just be Metco. It's like, that's true, it might not be. So why would we leave it there? We
And
could
then
Because I think then
we
that
need to-
dilutes the voice of a Metco parent representative or a Metco parent advisor.
I mean, you have to look at what are we elected to do. We're elected to represent all these groups. That's why we have the liaisons, to make sure that if we don't embody them in the way we look, that we are listening. I mean, that's why I'm on the steps, the liaison to steps, because it's important to have that. And that's where the work really gets done, I think, much more so than, having somebody have to come to all our meetings. But
how about a compromise of, sorry, go ahead, Helen.
Well, I guess I'm wondering, I would like to hear from the superintendent if he has any thoughts about either of these two, the subcommittee and the liaisons, and what.
Just finishing on this point as maybe a compromise language. How about a parenthetical at the end, e.g. Metco? Right. Robin, is Dr. Guillory available?
Sorry, I'll text him again. I know he was still having some issues, but let me see.
All right, so let's go back again. I know this is, wordsmithing is not the funnest activity to engage in a committee meeting, but let's try to hammer down this order here between the first sentence and the last paragraph. So it seems like there's agreement to lead off with racism. After that, do we just want to go in alphabetical order?
So I guess the bigotry as a standalone in between ableism and anti-LGBTQ and sexism. I don't know what others think about the bigotry between the specifics.
Yeah, well, bigotry and harassment both don't really specify who the targets are, so are therefore different from the others in the list, right?
Yeah.
So take those out.
I think
I
they
would
could be
take those
taken out,
out
and I
and
wouldn't
say-
miss them if they went, just because they don't add anything here.
But we could say harassment, sexism, and other forms of bigotry.
And you're
Well,
all hitting,
I think it's sexism before the generals.
So racism, sexism, anti-Semitism. Okay. And then other forms of bigotry at the end.
Do we want to add xenophobia? I would like it, but I'd like to hear from others on adding xenophobia.
Agree.
Is harassment a form of bigotry? I mean, it's an act, but
I think it's a little different. Harassment's an act, bigotry can be a thought.
yeah, and so I'm not sure harassment belongs in that list because it's not a form of bigotry.
It is a scourge, though.
It's a
The
scourge, but
scourges
we're
of-
listing. Okay, well,
Are there forms of bigotry and harassment? Maybe.
Yeah,
Andy,
that's
does that
good.
work?
That's good.
why is it so important to have the word harassment in there? And or does
we want
does it encompass something that's not otherwise part of the statement?
I mean, if you're concerned with
think we-
bigotry in thought only, you could say bigoted
Right.
action or bigotry and harassment.
We want to stop both the thoughts that precipitate and the actions themselves.
Oh, I
And
see.
the actions themselves would only be encompassed by the word harassment.
Okay.
Mariah?
I have a completely separate comment. It's about the name of the subcommittee. I would like to see the word anti-racism rather than just, or in addition to DEIJ.
Why?
Because I think it's explicit. It's important to explicitly name it. I don't want to have one or the other. I'd like to see both in there in some fashion.
I mean, that suggests to me that the list that we came up with is not quite the way to lead with.
The list at the beginning.
Yeah,
Well, racism was the very first word.
yes, but to call it out as and not call out the other kinds of discriminatory actions is to make a pretty strong suggestion about the remit of the subcommittee.
True, I see Stephen's point.
I think it's really important. I'll put it at that.
Yeah, I disagree for what it's worth. I think having a broad statement of what this includes is sufficient for it to take the actions necessary to achieve real equity, especially racial equity outcomes.
I think there's some intersectionality and obviously each issue also on its own legs. And I also think that that we have a very severe case of racism going on in the community. And I think Luciana wrote to us and said, don't be afraid to say the word racism. David, we can't see the thing anymore. It's showing something
I'm
else.
just saving so I don't
Okay.
lose all the details. All right.
Mariah, I agree about not being afraid to say racism or anti-racist, and that we're looking to be anti-racist and to have an anti-racist curriculum, staff, student body, community broadly defined, and that is a huge part of the work. I just don't want to dismiss the other communities from the work.
I don't want to dismiss them either. That's why I
I
was
don't
saying it
even
could be and, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I've said it, you know, if it doesn't have legs, it doesn't have legs, but it's fairly important in my book.
All right.
It's important in mine too. I'm just trying to understand how having it named as the subcommittee rather than as the work sounds or feels different for you, or yeah. So would you say it was the anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay.
I mean, we're not naming the committee right now.
Right.
It's the committee is going to do this work. And
Yeah.
that's, I guess, another reason why I would like to have it there.
All right, how do subcommittee members feel? So we heard from Val. Andy, what are your thoughts on this? Do we want anti-racism added to the beginning? So we will establish a subcommittee on anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice.
You know, I haven't thought about this, and I don't currently have a strong feeling either way.
I don't have a strong feeling either way either, although I do recognize Stephen's point.
Maybe we just kick it to the larger school committee and see what the remainder of points of view are on this.
Can we
Yeah.
add anti-racist for
Sure.
discussion purposes at the full committee?
Do you want to add it to what we recommend to the full committee, or we'll just mention it?
Well, I would like to recommend it, but I see a dearth of other committee members on board with that.
I mean, I'm fine either way. Andy's fine either way. We don't have Jennifer here. So you're the potential tiebreaker here, if you'd like to be, not to put more pressure on you.
No, I think you or Andy are the tiebreakers. I would add it. So I think you and Andy are the tiebreaker. One of you is the tiebreaker.
All right. Okay. Now, any other parts of this statement that we want to go over? Or do we think this is ready to vote for the full committee's consideration? Go back to the top.
If we're going to make very tiny tweaks, the phrase has not always led in this space it is a bit odd to me, sounding to me. Can we say it's not always led in this area?
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts, proposed edits? I can only see about half of you. So if someone has their hand raised or trying to jump in, just go right ahead.
There's an attendee hand up, David.
All right, Robin, could you promote that attendee? I can't see who it is.
It's Scott and Ananian.
All right. Robin, could you promote Scott and Ananian?
Just did.
All right, go ahead, Scott.
Sorry, I didn't realize I had my hand up. I ignore that. Thanks.
Well, while we have you on, is there anything you would like to add to this proposed statement by the school committee?
No, I'll just say I'm here for the later agenda item, but I'm impressed by the care that you're taking with the statement, and thank you for that.
All right, thank you. All right, so with that, I think this is ready to move. We can do a little bit of additional work on it at full committee. So would someone like to move this statement draft?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second it.
All right, Valerie, your vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, so just save this one more time. Okay. Thank you everyone for your patience. I know it can be a little difficult to do wordsmithing in an online meeting or any meeting for that matter. So next up on our agenda is a discussion of the latest draft of the restraint policy. Have subcommittee members had an opportunity to review it?
Yes.
Any questions, comments, feedback?
I had a couple.
Go ahead.
I don't know if somebody else wants to go first on this one. I'm happy to. Are you able to pull it up, David, or I'll just minimize my screen and if you're not.
I probably can, just have to try to find it, but go ahead and comment while I'm looking.
So the first comment is that I think that verbally, I still stand by a verbal report to the family happening by the time the student gets home. I think that there are too many instances where students are either traumatized or they're nonverbal or both, and are acting out at home, and families have no idea why. And so 24 hours for me for verbal still feels a little bit long. I know it's movement, but it still feels a little bit long for a phone call. And then if you slide down to where we start talking about social emotional support, and I appreciate you adding in the social emotional support, it feels to me like we're offering more social emotional support to those who witness it, which I think is important and we need to do. But I think that language of behavioral specialists and guidance counselors should be the sort of the same for the individual who had the restraint administered on them. Take other steps to seek, medical and or social emotional assistance. This may include, and then sort of list out the same, that last sentence. And even if they're not demonstrating, I actually think they should speak to a guidance counselor or a behavioral specialist. So, and it's also the significant physical and mental distress, the significant word significant in there, I guess rubs me the wrong way as well. What does insignificant mental distress after a restraint look like? So I would strike significant. If the student is demonstrating or expressing.
Just trying to find where that is.
So right above where your cursor is, if it appears that the student.
Oh, okay.
So there's. To me, there's no minor physical or mental in that space. Demonstrating or articulating. And then where you added, this may include contacting behavioral specialists and guidance counselors, I think.
That was mentioned 2 sentences earlier, so I'm just wondering if we want to change this formulation. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So this
David,
may include. Go ahead. Casey.
Sorry, no, while you are looking at these titles, I agree with Val's edits, but can we just say counselors? Because then that can include adjustment counselors, school counselors, and to some extent, school psychologists also.
Okay. All right, while we're in this section, any other suggested edits?
So that last sentence now in that paragraph, this may include contacting OSS. I think you just need a comma after OSS. And then I don't know if we want to include behavioral specialists for the student being restrained or just counselors after that.
Val,
restraint.
when you say behavior specialist, do you mean ABA or do you mean more therapeutic?
I'm just looking at the language that was
Or
included.
BCBA rather? Yeah.
It was in the draft, so I'm just responding to the draft. I was
Sure.
assuming that it meant BCBA's.
Yeah, I think both, because we want to look at it when a student has been restrained. There could be times when it could be the case that the student has a behavior plan, in which case it's developed by a BCBA. And so a BCBA should be notified because they know the student's profile and they know the antecedents to students' behavior and can sort of analyze it through that way. And then you complement that with a counselor support to provide that social emotional support too, that's more intentional. Not to say that the BCBA doesn't, but a counselor's training is obviously different than that of a BCBA. So I just want to make sure we call that out if that's what we want.
We'll call it out. I guess I just want to make sure that are we calling it out for the student who's restrained, the students who witness, or both?
I mean, it does say this may include, so I would add both, because then they can consult for both students who have witnessed it and students who themselves who have been restrained. But I would call it out as BCBAs, board certified behavior analysts, because we don't have any positions that are behavior specialists.
We also don't have BCBAs in every building at every time. So, yeah.
But we do have BCBAs assigned to schools, to every school.
Right, but not every day of every right, like Driscoll and Baker share one.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Whereas counselors are always, some counselor is always on site. So Casey, can you just walk me through your suggested edit where you put BCBA?
Yeah, I'm not so, and forgive me because I wasn't here for the last meeting where this language was added, but it sounds like for this last sentence, the committee would want my office, or this would allow school leaders to contact, have the option to contact my office, BCBAs, and counselors. Is that accurate?
I took the BCBAs out in terms of staff who witnessed a restraint. So it's just now that they could contact your office and counselors broadly.
For staff who witnessed the restraint or for other
For both.
students?
Both.
I would just add BCBAs back in.
Okay.
So after the Office of Student Services, board certified behavior analysts.
And I'll rephrase the term in this paragraph. Or are you fine with behavioral specialists here, or should it be spelled out again as board certified behavioral analysts?
I would call it out again. I just want to make sure the titles are correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and then Val, your other point was regarding notification of parents.
Yeah, I still think that the verbal should come by the student's return home. It seems to me that there should be someone available for a phone call.
I agree with Val about the substance. I wonder whether the way to express this is to leave the first sentence as it was, but then to add a sentence saying, when possible, the initial notification should occur before the end of the school day. And everything else could stay as it was.
All right.
David, we also have an attendee with her hand up, just so you know.
So I'm sorry, Andy. So that would be as soon as practical, but no later than 24 hours. But we hope by the time the student gets home. I'm trying to understand how that would.
Yeah, so add a sentence. Oh, you're saying that what I'm suggesting isn't really coherent.
Well, it is a lot of flexibility. It's sort of two time frames.
Right, so within 24 hours is a hard requirement. Right, and you may not be able to reach somebody by the end of the school day, but the point is that you need to try.
Right, because
So-
here's a concern, Val. What if the restraint happens at 10 minutes before dismissal and the phone call's made and no one picks up? You can't just leave the child at school. So in
Right.
those types of situations, it might not.
But there's an email. You can email,
Yes.
right? I mean, someone can email. Because
I know that for-
we allow for an email. Right, it says verbal or via electronic correspondence. So from my perspective, you know, the principal or someone who.
How about we spell out the next sentence? An attempt at notification must be made prior to the student leaving school.
So that works for me. I'm just thinking of practically if what you just said happened, David, if it happened at 2:25, that I would want to give a principal who's probably there until at least 4 o'clock, or Casey or whoever is there, the opportunity to email, you know, by 4.
Maybe we could ask Casey what happens right now and what is the best way to communicate? What you found to be the best way to do this?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Helen. So I think for the most part, principals are calling families before the end of the day. I think the difficulty for me is trying to imagine, so before principals call, they want to get all the facts first. Because when you call a parent, you want to be able to say, what led up to it? What did we do? Where did it happen? Who witnessed it? And then what happened? What were the steps taken afterwards? The student was seen by the nurse, then checked in with her school counselor, checked in with the teacher, you know, all those steps, you want to have that ready before you reach out to a family member, to a parent. I think that's just being responsible. So it's also hard because it'll involve speaking potentially to multiple staff members, and you have to catch them in the middle of their workday. And then for some staff, they require a bit more time to process it. And so the principal has to do that piece too, should do that piece.
Process it in
And
what
then-
way, Casey?
Some staff are traumatized by it, right? And so
Right, but
it's
I guess
talking through-
I guess you just made my point for me, which is that we're more concerned about the adults' trauma at that moment than the students.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it takes time and they want to check in with everybody. I'm not saying that puts it off.
I'm trying
think-
to think of the parent who's receiving this call. They'll find out the student was restrained, but will they find out why and all the rest of it at the same point? Or is the purpose, Val, you don't want them to just know your child was restrained, right?
Well,
Or-
honestly, if it has been my child, Helen,
Yeah.
and I actually would have liked to have known that at a minimum.
At the minimum that they were restrained, okay.
Yes, because there was it then took, I'm fine to share my experience. It took days and days of me requesting from school up through the superintendent to get a report of something horrific that had happened. And so I do like that there's now an actual report requirement within 5 business days where you get a lot more data. And I think that, you know, our administrators are responsible. If I at least were notified that a restraint had happened.
We'll get back to you with the details
We'll get, right.
tomorrow or whatever.
Right, that the principal would get back to me in a timely fashion the next day. And then I'd have the written report with the moment the restraint started, the moment it ended, and et cetera, in a report within 5 days. That would make me more comfortable. But if my student came home, or any student in the district came home and was traumatized and experiencing and exhibiting results of trauma, as a parent, I would be really discombobulated myself in terms of how to respond to that student without having at least the knowledge that there had been a restraint.
I agree with Valerie. The way that I am reading the language of this policy is that notification of the parent or caregiver guardian has to occur really as soon as possible before the end of the school day. And it might just be, we use a physical restraint on your child today, and we will get back to you with details because we still have to gather information, meet with everyone who is involved and fully understand the situation, what precipitated it. And that's where the written report comes in 5 business days later. And then the parent caregiver will have some of those details. But for a parent or caregiver to be blindsided by this, or not even be told at all while the child is still suffering, I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think anyone does. And so at a minimum, parents and caregivers should know what's transpired so that they can be prepared to provide that emotional succor that's going to be needed. Casey, I see that you have your hand raised again, or maybe that was from before. Go ahead.
No, that was from before, sorry, but I do agree with your what you just said. I also know that Faith Dantowitz's hand has been raised for quite some time now.
Okay. Robin, could you promote Ms. Dantowitz to panelist so that she can participate?
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to agree with Val and you, David, that when a child is restrained, it's really important, especially since some of our students are nonverbal and some of our students have had trauma, have experienced trauma in their lives, to have notification to parents, even if it's just the bare minimum of information, so that they know why their child is behaving a certain way, so that they have some idea. It's essential for families to understand the behaviors that they're seeing, even if they don't have all the details. And I can say that as a parent of a nonverbal child.
All right, any other comments or thoughts on this provision or any other?
So can that language then be as soon as practical, but no later than 5 p.m. that day?
I think that that's doable, Val, for sure, especially if it's not a full report.
So then we don't need the second sentence anymore.
Well, my one concern though, with this formulation would be, what if the restraint occurs on a field trip? And sometimes there's an overnight somewhere else, or then the 5 p.m. deadline wouldn't necessarily make sense if the restraint occurred at 7 p.m. Although this would cover probably 99.9% of incidences, but it's not foolproof. So do we really want to have language that narrows it to this extent?
I was just trying to give administrators time to write an email that maybe had a little bit more detail in it, but.
Is it why 5 p.m. though, Val? I mean, if school lets out at 2:40 and the child arrives home at 3 and the parent doesn't know.
I'm fine with the student leaving school. I was just trying to give a little bit of give. I obviously prefer the student leaving school. I was just trying to balance an administrator's time to be able to do that.
I think I would leave it at leaving school. It's just that an attempt has to be made. Is it really that difficult to make a phone call, to send a quick email?
So I think
hope-
I would take out attempt though, David. I think if we're saying it's just a basic notification, then it's not an attempt, right? Then it's a notification, a verbal or written or email notification must be made prior to the student leaving school.
I think I want to add or school-sponsored events in case it happened at an athletic game or somewhere off campus.
Sure.
Maybe activity.
So I would say an initial notification must be made prior to the student leaving school or school-sponsored activity, either verbally or via electronic correspondence.
Well, the next sentence kind of spells out the conditions for this, right? Like the initial reporting.
Right, the very next sentence states that though.
So can we take out while?
Mhm.
In the interest of expediency, this initial reporting.
So just start with initial reporting.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been fine for within, yeah. Initial reporting. Yes.
All right, I see Mariah has her hand up. Go ahead, Mariah.
I just have a comment about if a kid were to fall down and hit their head, for example. I'm just thinking of another physical thing that happens to a child that could be upsetting. We get a call home from a grown-up immediately. And it's important, right? We hear from them, they tell us the kid's okay. I feel really uncomfortable with an email, like someone being able to send an email that many parents may not be very, they're not checking in on emails or anything else. I just feel very uncomfortable about that. That's sort of like assuming that you've made the connection as opposed to actually making a connection with a caregiver.
So I guess,
what
Mariah,
if someone doesn't pick up the phone? I mean, like, with
Well, what
email,
happens if your
at
kid
least
falls down and hits their head and no one picks up the phone? Then you try the other
Right.
grown-up. There's something that there's a chain of people that are on your forms you fill in September, and they reach out and have contact with someone because it's important. And I think this is important at that same level.
I would agree
I
with
mean,
that.
all I'm
It's
saying is
just-
that the likelihood of actually making contact may in some cases be higher through email than by trying to call around.
I agree with Andy. Speaking for myself, I get phone calls all day from clients or potential clients or people I don't know, and I don't answer. If it's a number I don't
David, when
necessarily
you get it, when your kid goes to school, the phone from school, you program into your phone that says Pierce School.
Right, but you don't
And the numbers are recognizable. They're not like generic numbers.
That's assuming someone calls from a school-based number. It might be the individual staff person from their cell phone. You don't really know, but if you get a text message or an email, it might actually be easier for some people.
Someone might text you and say, hey, this is me calling from my cell phone. Can you call me? But again, when this happens with other physical things happening to children, they reach out and they actually confirm communication. Sending an email to me that is not, responded to or anything else is not, in my opinion, adequate for what we're talking about.
So I agree with you, Mariah. So can we do verbal in the first instance through the list, right through? If no reply by 2 p.m. an email will be sent or something like that.
about something like this? Initial reporting of a restraint to parents, caregivers, guardians may be via electronic correspondence if there is no reply to verbal outreach.
But I think we need to somewhere state that verbal outreach is the first.
Okay.
I'd also like clarification about if you're including emergency contact in the list of people.
I would say shall instead of should, David, but that's me.
Shall be made verbally. Okay.
Mhm.
If there's no response to verbal outreach, initial notification shall be made. Actually, take out initial because it's not initial anymore. Notification shall be made via electronic correspondence. I see that Faith has her hand raised again. Go ahead, Faith.
You are going to take out and no later than within 24 hours, because you've already said that the initial report has to be within the same day, right? That's all I just wanted to confirm.
Okay. Yes, that was the intention.
Thanks.
Any other comments, thoughts, or proposed edits to this section?
So is the subsection C then comport with what that the staff member shall?
Well, that's contacting Office of Student Services. So I'm not sure that that also needs to be as immediate as notifying the parent, caregiver, guardian. I'd actually rather that the parent, caregiver, guardian is given the highest priority.
I would too. I just am wanting to make sure that I'm not missing anything cut off on that.
Andy?
Only if we're done with this section now. I just have a question about one other place in the policy.
All right, I'll just go back to Faith then in case Faith had another point on this. Go ahead, Faith.
So this is not on this section, so I should go after Andy. Sorry.
All right, no problem.
Okay, my question is actually about something also on this page. It's still up on the screen. So in section F, subsection A,
Yes.
it says that every use of restraint shall be documented in writing and reported, and the immediate supervisor of the principal or head of school. Is that what was meant? The immediate supervisor of the principal or the head of school? Like, who would that be other than the superintendent?
So that's language is lifted directly from the drafts that most other districts use. I find it curious as well. I
Yeah,
just decided not to modify that, but I assume that means superintendent.
I see. Okay.
But we can spell that out if you would like. I don't have a strong preference.
Yeah, unless I misunderstand our org chart, there is nobody between a principal and the superintendent.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand this because a lot of these are done or can be done by BCBAs and paras who don't report directly to the principal. Right? Casey, correct me there on BCBAs. They report to you, right? Or someone else, to head of guidance?
They can report to principals or directors of special education.
It's referring to the supervisor of the person who's writing the report, correct?
Well,
the
that's what I'm trying to
specific-
clarify, Helen, because
Yeah, that's what
that
it's,
wouldn't always be.
yeah, I get you. I mean, it could be, you know, I imagine if it were in a classroom, the person who observed it was maybe the BCBA, the classroom teacher might be their supervisor or something, or paraprofessional, you know.
Shall we document writing reports OSS? So I mean, if we want all of them documented in writing and reported to OSS and the superintendent, I feel like we should just say that. Or we should just say the superintendent, OSS, and the principal head of school. I mean, to me, all three make sense.
Even though it may be the principal or head of school who's actually doing the reporting in this case.
But this is for records maintenance, right? So,
Right.
so it'll just be in their file.
I think it's important for a head of school to know who was restrained within that school building. So I think all three, this edit makes sense.
There's also the provision in the regulations, David, that says that principals are supposed to do a review on a monthly basis of the restraints that were done.
Yes.
So that's covered also, just in terms of your concern about, I agree with you that principals need to know obviously who's being restrained. And they are typically the ones who are writing the reports. Although for record maintenance, sometimes it's a designee.
All right. Any other comments on this or any other portion of the policy? Go ahead, Faith.
Hi. So I'm concerned about where we talk about timeouts versus. Can you pull it up where
Yes.
I don't have it right handy? Oh, I think you just passed it. Yeah. So I think it's very important that we spell out for families the difference between time. I said this last time, I know, timeout and seclusion, because seclusion is expressly prohibited. And so families know that they could be separated. They could be in a separate room, but there will be somebody observing them. Because I think there's a very fine line between timeouts and seclusions in public schools in Brookline and in many schools. And I'm concerned that this isn't spelling out a timeout, and that timeouts should also be shared with families if they're in a separate room. So I don't know if that goes in another place or if you're going to share it somewhere else, but I think it's really important that families know when their child is in a timeout situation as well.
So I agree, Faith. My question for you, Casey, is if the timeout room has a door, I'm assuming that qualifies as seclusion now.
Well, that's why I'm adding now, while remaining in an unconfined space within the sight of staff.
Right.
Is that enough?
What does it mean if you have a room with a window and the child is inside the room and the adult is outside of the room but watching them? Is that considered seclusion or timeout?
So from my perspective, it'd be considered seclusion, but I guess I'm asking, my question is how the district views that.
We don't consider that seclusion because the student they're not confined. They can always get out. They're not prevented from leaving.
But what if the room is a room where they're not allowed to come out, but someone's watching them?
I mean, I would have to run through our schools right now.
I guess
but
I'm, I guess
like-
I'm just thinking of a 5-year-old, Casey, like a 5-year-old with a, say a, you know, a rectangular window on a door. They're not gonna be able to see that high. They're gonna,
But the
Yep.
idea is staff have to have eyes on the student at all times, and the student can get out if they wanted to. So you're not holding the door closed on the student.
I guess that doesn't make me feel much better about their mental health.
There are times when a student is so dysregulated that they're hurting others that they have to be separated. And staff are communicating, they have eyes on students and they're communicating with them throughout the process to try to de-escalate them.
Faith had her hand up again, David.
Go ahead, Faith.
I actually put it down, but I will speak on this. I think, again, this is my concern, is that there is a discrepancy between a timeout and seclusion. And I think that it's, if a child is in a timeout room and the door is closed, then parents should be informed. Parents should be notified, just like if they are restrained. And that's why I brought this up.
All right, so maybe add to here, a timeout does not qualify as a physical restraint unless the student is in an enclosed room.
Again, my
But
concern
a
is
student being in an
notification.
enclosed room is not a physical restraint.
Against the child's will, I can put as well.
So is there a
But then
time
wouldn't it-
limit?
But then wouldn't
Is
it
it-
be, but then wouldn't it be seclusion, which
Right,
is actually
exactly.
prohibited?
Right.
But it's all against their will is what you're, I mean, it is against their will. I am really uncomfortable with this. And there's also no time limit on this, which is very concerning to me. I've heard from several families who've had students who were in quote unquote timeouts for an hour, over an hour. Young kids, little kids. Not that the age necessarily matters, but little kids.
This is though a policy on restraint. I'm not sure we should be going into details about timeout. So the
Well,
paragraph,
I think to the extent, David, that we're not understanding one another or agreeing with one another on what seclusion is versus timeout.
well, the paragraph before defines seclusion. So seclusion shall mean the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented or reasonably believes they will be prevented from leaving. Seclusion does not include a timeout as defined in 603 CMR 46.2. The use of seclusion is expressly prohibited. And then timeout shall mean a non-physical behavioral support strategy in which a student temporarily separates from the learning activity or the classroom, either by choice or by direction from staff, for the purpose of calming while remaining in an unconfined space within the sight of staff. A timeout does not qualify as a physical restraint.
Is that the definition from CMR 46.02? And does that
It's not-
definition, is that definition clear about the line between seclusion and timeout?
Well, let me pull that up now.
The use of the word unconfined helps me. That I think you added that, right? Because they have to be in an unconfined space.
Right, but Casey seems to, unless I misunderstood her, is saying that some of what PSB calls a timeout does take place in confined spaces, like in enclosed rooms.
I agree. And I would
Yeah.
add that I think that I signed off on, and I flagged this for Linus. And I don't know, Casey, if you heard about me flagging it, but there was a school which had some maintenance work relating to spaces that could accommodate students. And I brought up questions because I thought seclusion was prohibited, and I wanted to understand that, and I haven't heard the answers to it yet.
So seclusion is prohibited, Mariah, but now I'm reading directly from the Code of Massachusetts regulations. Seclusion shall mean the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. Seclusion does not include a timeout as defined in 603 CMR 46.2. Timeout shall mean a behavioral support strategy developed pursuant to 603 CMR 46.4.1, in which a student temporarily separates from the learning activity or the classroom, either by choice or by direction from staff for the purpose of calming. During timeout, a student must be continuously observed by a staff member. Staff shall be with the student or immediately available to the student at all times. The space used for timeout must be clean, safe, sanitary, and appropriate for the purpose of calming. Timeout shall cease as soon as the student has calmed. And that's all it says.
That's interesting because it seems like the state's definition of timeout and the state's definition of seclusion could overlap. That you could have a situation that is both seclusion and timeout, and the one is prohibited and the other is not.
Right, so that's why I think that adding unconfined to our definition of timeout helps somewhat, because it indicates that if the child does not want to be in that room, even if the student was brought there initially against the student's will, that there's the ability to get out. Whereas with seclusion, that would not be the case.
Can we add on the timeout piece, David, that the timeout shall cease, the piece about the timeout ceasing as soon as the student is calm?
Okay, I can, sure. Although physical restraint mentions that as well. But yes, that's important because that addresses your concern about 1 hour timeouts, which seem way too long.
There is also the provision in the regulations, though, that after, I can't remember if it's 25 minutes or 30 minutes, that a principal or designee has to be notified if the student isn't calmed by then.
Where's that, Casey?
Somewhere, it's in the regulations. I don't know where it is exactly, but there is a practice there. So I just don't want the public listening to think that like a kid could go 60 minutes nonstop with adults not checking in and ensuring like maybe we need to switch up our approach.
But doesn't an adult have to be there? Don't the kids have to be within sight of staff during timeout anyway?
Yes, but
Like,
an
why should an adult have to
administrator,
check in?
but an administrator has to be notified. So there's someone with authority who can say, we need to switch up. You know, perhaps we need to try a different strategy.
Got it.
Isn't that the same with restraint? Do you have a procedure in place, Casey, where staff switches out on restraint if it takes more than X number of minutes so that staff don't get frustrated?
Yeah, it's not, it's actually through the training program through safety care. I can't remember exactly what it is, but yes.
So unconfined space, does that just mean any space where it's not the case that the student is physically prevented or reasonably believes they will be prevented from leaving? For example, like a so-called timeout room, but with an open door, that would be considered an unconfined space.
That's how I would construe it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remove any ambiguity about what is seclusion and what is timeout, because it seems that the state's definition leaves this gray area where something could be both, right? And it seems like we really need to spell out.
I do want to add, though, we do have students who bolt and can be dangerous when they do. And so I want to be mindful of language here that gives staff the ability to close a door, not prevent the student from leaving. A student can at any point open the door and leave, but sometimes a closed door that's all it takes.
So then was it the intent of the state's definition or legislation to make that, to prohibit that? Because it does sound like no matter what the reason, if you're placing the child in a room, shutting the door on them and preventing them from leaving, that is seclusion. It doesn't matter whether an adult is watching, right? That's seclusion. So that's prohibited.
Correct. Right, like you
So-
can't hold a door closed.
Yeah, but
While
having
a
a door
kid is in the other
closed
room.
for a kid is more or less, it's reasonably believing they will be prevented from leaving.
Right,
Yes,
I
but it's,
agree with Andy and Mariah here.
Yeah,
So
I do too.
how do members feel about this, e.g. parenthetical to try to further establish the definition of unconfined? So e.g. open area or a room with an open door. Because Casey, to your concern about a student running off, because a staff person has to be watching, I think that threat would be mitigated. If the student darts out the room, no one's saying that the adults cannot redirect the student. It's just can't essentially keep them barricaded in an enclosed space.
but we're also now putting staff at risk. I just want to make sure the committee understands that and that this is different from practice from other public schools.
Well, what does the other public schools language say?
It has what the regulations are.
I'm just
It
not, I'm
doesn't-
having trouble understanding how this practice, which, yeah, I believe you that other schools do it that way, like how that doesn't violate the law. I mean, as it seems to be written here, right? As we're quoting from the state regulations.
The difference is that students can leave. But what we're trying to say is we're going to leave all our doors open, which then puts our staff at risk.
But you
of
just said
getting hurt.
students couldn't leave.
No,
If-
I did not say that.
Well, if
Students
they're
at any
if-
point in time, there's a difference between a closed door and a door that's being held shut.
But you're just
A
talking about a
closed door
bolter,
that's
Casey.
unlocked.
Casey, you talked about a bolter. So if a bolter opens a door, then
Yeah.
what?
Are we okay
Then
with an
staff are going to
unlocked
try and
door?
block them from leaving. But they're not going to try and restrain a student, but at least that door is one stop. It's one way of preventing the student from bolting. If they open the door and they try to bolt, the staff is there. But if we're saying we're going to leave doors open, that's a big practice change. And I wouldn't support it.
How about unlocked door? Because you'll hear a door jostling open. But the students could then.
Well, what is the practice now? Is the practice that doors are locked or doors are unlocked?
No, doors are unlocked. I don't even know if our doors lock actually to our timeout rooms. Our staff know when they are trained that seclusion is illegal. You cannot block doors. You cannot block kids from leaving. But we have bolters. We have kids who are bigger than staff. And staff can get hurt, or kids themselves who are bolters can get hurt.
Yeah, I think it's not that I'm necessarily wanting a change in practice. It's that if even after months of looking at this policy, I still do not understand what is allowed and what is not. Then I don't think your typical family reading this policy will understand that either. I just want this to be written in a way that is comprehensible. And right now it's not, even to me.
I think what Casey's referring to would fall under physical escort. So if a student is trying to run, there can be a temporary touching or holding in order to direct the student safely back to where that student should be. But that's not the same as keeping a child in a enclosed room where the child can't leave. That does sound like seclusion. I agree with Andy, Mariah, Valerie. Hopefully this definition works, open area or a room with an unlocked door. So the door could still be closed, but the child's able to open the door, assuming that they can reach the knob, depending on the age. Faith, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to my concern. I understand what Casey's saying, that that sometimes you need to close the door. I totally understand because I've observed it firsthand and with other students, just because I've been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what I want to make clear is that when a timeout like this happens, parents should be notified right away. It's the same, a child has the same response, especially students of color, have the same response that they do to being physically restrained because of trauma, because of what that room represents to them. That's why I keep saying that you can say does not qualify as a physical restraint, but parents will be notified that their child was put in a timeout in a separate room with an open door or with a door that is unlocked.
So then we need to somehow write in a distinction between a timeout that occurs in a truly open area, like just you get removed to a different part of the classroom or something, and one where you are in a separate room, but the door may be open or maybe closed but unlocked.
Can the policy just direct staff to develop an appropriate form for the district to say your child was X today, this is what happened, and then the form guides parents and it says those kinds of things.
This is not something that we're competent to do, at least not in the moment.
Well, but we don't have to do it. You can direct staff to do it.
Right.
That's the point of a policy, is not to get into the details of this. Has this committee ever asked, and I know you're here, Casey, but I'm just wondering if the committee has heard directly of sort of the range of these things that are happening to get a sense of the spectrum of restraint to seclusion, et cetera. It might help with some of the wording.
Faith has her hand up. I don't know if that's still her.
I just never put my hand down, sorry.
All right, so how about this new language I've added here in response to Faith's comment? Timeout shall cease as soon as the student is calmed. A timeout does not qualify as a physical restraint. However, parents, guardians, caregivers shall be notified in accordance with the reporting requirement provisions of this restraint policy in the event that a timeout occurs in a closed door timeout room. Would that address your concern, Faith?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay. Are subcommittee members okay with that language?
Can I make a question just about the seclusion language? Where you say seclusion does not include a timeout as defined in but then you just defined timeout explicitly. And I think it might be more confusing if you have your own definition of timeout, because your definition of timeout no longer matches the CMR either.
Yeah, so timeout as defined below.
Exactly, yeah, it's defined below.
All right, any other portions of this policy that we would like to go over? We are running very late and still need to get to warrant articles.
I need to go, so thank you all for this conversation. Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead, Faith.
I just want to thank you all for the thought and the care that you're putting into this. It's really important to our students and our teachers.
You're very welcome.
So this hasn't had any reading yet by the school committee, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So there'll be at least 2 more passes at this by the full committee before it
That's right.
gets, all right. I think that we should be we should maybe do a more detailed presentation of this. So when it does get to the school committee, then we even normally do for a policy, just because there's been so much discussion of it. And it's been, to me, like very subtle and confusing at times. So I'd be surprised if somebody coming to it fresh would see all the implications here.
Yes. So any other final tweaks on this, or do you think we're ready to move this to the full committee?
I think we can move it. As Andy said, we'll have another pass in case we find some reference that we removed in a different place or something.
Yeah, I'm more worried that that there's still some looseness in the language that could lead to confusion, or would inadvertently, prohibit something that really is that we don't intend to be prohibiting. But I'd be ready to move to at least send this to the school committee for a first reading.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right, thank you, Helen, for your patience and waiting this long for us to finally get to warrant articles.
I have dinner guests here, so can I go to the one that I want to talk about? The rest I don't care about.
Sure, absolutely, go right ahead.
Synthetic turf. There are 2 warrant articles. One that sets up a committee to look at it, and one that prohibits it. And I would strongly recommend that we go with the committee to look at it. I have very strong feelings about this issue because I see what happens to our fields, especially on the school grounds. At Ridley, they were never able to play on the grounds because there was mud, there was never grass. Grass can't grow when you have thousands of kids' feet running around on it. Same thing with the high school. We now have a turf field. I will be willing to bet within 5 years that field will be mud, because the fields need time to come back. You need to leave them for a season that nobody goes on them. None of our fields can have that. It's just impossible. Between our athletic programs and the students in the schools, it just doesn't happen. If we want our kids to be able to play sports, we need to have fields that they can play on. So that's my piece. I don't know if there's any other questions you have about it. I can tell you all my experiences with all the different schools.
For purposes of today, Helen, we're just looking at which articles would be relevant to the schools. And then, yes, and then we refer those articles to the committee.
You're going to take this anyways as one of both of these. Bye. I'm done. Sorry.
Provided invaluable commentary to our other agenda items, so it was not a waste. Your time is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you,
I hate policy. Thank you guys for doing it.
Thank you, Helen. There is an attendee with their hand up, David.
Yes, this is the student who authored a couple of warrant articles, and he presented at our last meeting. Robin, could you promote Jay?
Hello. Can you all hear me?
Welcome back. Yes.
Hello. This is on warrant articles 28 and 29. Just want to preface this. 28 would allow those 16 years of age and up to vote in Brookline elections, and warrant article 29 would allow legal permanent residents to vote in town elections. I've already talked to this subcommittee, as mentioned, so just what I'm going to say now is just going to be a brief summary of what I said then. the school committee should issue a report on both warrant articles 28 and 29. Warrant article 28 will give older high school students a greater say in town education policy and other town policies impacting them and their families. The warrant article will also work well with the town's civics curriculum to prepare students to be informed and participatory voters. For warrant article 29, Brookline is home to many non-citizens, including parents with children in the public schools of Brookline. Warrant article 29 will give them a vote in their children's education and a say in town education policy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we will get back to Jay's warrant articles. Why don't we go in order, starting with the single-digit warrant article numbers. We did go over these briefly at our last meeting. Helen had indicated at the prior meeting that warrant article 7, which deals with the granting of an easement for the Brookline Hills condominium and Brington Road near the Cypress Street building, does not bear much relevance to the schools, so we don't have to worry about that one. So I would respect Helen's intuition on that and recommend that we not take up that warrant article. Do others feel differently? No? Okay. The next article that I think merits some discussion is Article 8, which is the appropriation article. That's what includes ultimately what our appropriation will be. Do we want to make a statement on Article 8? Or do we want the full committee to consider making a statement on Article 8, I should say?
I think the full committee should discuss.
All right, do you agree, Andy? This is the basic budget appropriation article.
Right, so it goes without saying that we'll have some input on that. So I'm not sure why the school committee even needs to discuss the question. I mean, of course, we'll be presenting in some form at town meeting.
We will, but I'm talking about if we're going to have a specific voted statements like we do with other warrant articles. I think we should. It's something that we have sometimes done, but not always.
I mean, we may, yeah, this year more than some other years, we may actually need to do something, or to say something substantive besides just presenting the budget itself. So, yeah.
Right, I would agree. Okay, so Andy, I'll take that as a motion to refer to the full committee. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. The next warrant article that seems like it potentially could be relevant. This was raised by Jennifer at our last meeting, warrant article 9, which would adjust the living wage for town employees. I invited the Director of Human Resources to participate this evening. The director's not here. The way I read the summary of the warrant article, it appears that this would apply to town department employees, not necessarily school department employees, although I don't know that with 100% certainty. How do others feel about this warrant article? Do we want to refer it to the full school committee for consideration or let it go?
I think we should refer until we get clarification on whether it applies to anybody who. Do we share any resources with the town in terms of staffing? We do, right? Like we share time with Tony and with buildings and things like that, some of the building staff.
Yes. So I think we could learn more about it. I agree with you. I don't see the harm in a referral to the full school committee. So would someone like to move?
I'll move it.
Okay, so a second.
I'll second.
Okay, your vote, Valerie?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Next up. Article 23. This is what Helen was referencing earlier, the warrant article that will essentially create a committee to review how we proceed with fields, whether we go with natural grass or with synthetic turf. I think this is clearly related to the schools. So I'm willing to move this. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, to your vote, Valerie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. Then the very next warrant article also pertains to the same issue, but would essentially ban turf after a 3-year, or would create a 3-year moratorium at least. And it would ban specific substances such as total organic fluorine. It would add a lot of restrictions to the type of surfaces that we could install, regardless as to what our positions might be on whether it should succeed or not. I do think it's related to schools. And so I would recommend referral to the full school committee.
Second.
All right, Valerie, your vote?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Next up, and this is for discussion purposes, I think it's less of a slam dunk, Article 26. This would amend the Park and Recreation Commission's composition in terms of its membership. It also would alter how some of the current funding mechanisms. There is one portion of the warrant article that directly mentions the schools. That can be found on page 67 of the warrant article summary. It is the 4th paragraph, and I'll read that. If approved for financial assistance, the household must update records annually for review. However, if a family resides at BHA in Section 8 housing or receives free or reduced lunches, in lieu of updating data, BHA or the Brookline schools may provide documentation on behalf of the household to satisfy proof of financial need. So that's the one time that schools explicitly are mentioned here. The language is permissive rather than creating an obligation on the schools to provide data on behalf for park and recreation programming. So what do we think? Do we want to advance this, or is this only a tangential relation and we can let it go?
I think we can let that one go. The only reference seems to be for data collection, sourcing, and
I would agree. Andy?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts?
The same.
All right. So next up. So that gets us to the 2 warrant articles that Jay has authored. Article 28, which deals with extending the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds for municipal elections. What are your thoughts?
my thoughts on whether it relates to schools.
Yes. Yeah.
Certainly impacts our students.
I'm going to say that it impacts the schools in the sense that our mission statement includes language around trying to create global citizens and trying to activate our student body to be engaged in the world around them. And to the extent that allowing direct participation in municipal elections helps to further that mission, I think it does bear relevance, or at least enough relevance for the full committee's consideration.
That's also how I see it, David. Actually, that's the reason why for this, I would probably draw the line between 28 and 29. I think that we should weigh in on 28, and I would prefer personally not to weigh in on 29.
And I agree with you, Andy. All right, so is there a motion to refer 28 to the full school committee?
I'll move that.
Okay,
I'll second. I'll second.
Valerie, your vote, Andy?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
And I also vote for referral. And then Article 29, which would extend the vote to residents of Brookline. I agree with Andy's reasoning, so I'm inclined not to move this for referral to the full school committee. Val, do you feel differently?
I do not feel differently.
Okay. And let's see if there's anything else. I don't think so. There weren't any other warrant articles that I had identified for discussion, but I'd like to give the two of you the opportunities or anything else you see that you think we should consider.
There was not. You did a good job covering it, David. Thank you. As
Andy,
always.
any other additional warrant articles? No? All right, in that case, we can move on to new business. Is there any new business? Seeing none, we can finally conclude this meeting. Thank you very much to the two of you for participating, as well as to you, Jay, for appearing twice and explaining your warrant articles to us. It's great to see student enthusiasm such as yours.
Thank you, Jay.
And also thank you to those who participated earlier on in the meeting when we were discussing the restraint policy and the school committee statement in response to recent racist and anti-Semitic incidents. So that concludes our meeting for today, and we have many more meetings to come this week.
Thanks, Robin.
See you later.
Thank you.